Hello, can you hear me? Hello, Jude, good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
Hello.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Are you using your headphones?
No, I'm not. Is it audible?
Okay, yes, it's audible now.
Okay, I'm not using headphones.
Okay. This is better though.
All right.
Right, so
Okay.
we'll just wait for Bear to log on to the meeting.
Okay, he's aware that is he aware that we are testing?
Okay, a minute, please.
This is my camera. You said?
No. He's not aware that we are testing, but he will join us soon, like by 3.
Okay. I want to test my camera. Okay.
Where are you? Are you in your office?
Where am I?
Okay. Hello, Jude.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah, so as people are coming in, you just because people are already joining the meeting, yeah. So you just 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 keep the conversation going until the facilitator joins us.
All right. So do I get a notification that he's in already? Can you see me clearly?
Yeah, I can see you now. But it's like your video is hanging. A bit from my end.
It's hanging.
Okay.
But my voice, what I'm saying is not hanging, right?
No, it's not.
What's important is they should hear sharp.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'll start admitting them by 3 p.m.
Okay. Let me go and hurriedly share this on my platform. Let me know when you start admitting, please.
All right, I'll let you know.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. How long is this supposed to last?
An hour. Okay, so it's going to be an hour, yeah? And then the other 30 minutes. Then the other 30 minutes, people can ask questions. Okay, wait. And then the other 30 minutes, people can ask questions.
Okay. Okay.
Let me even check my video.
You want to check your video? Check. Oh. What do you know how to pronounce his name?
Okay, he's joining us. Don't worry, just like when he comes, just
I'll call him Bear. His name is Bear. Is it
yes,
not Bear?
yes. Okay, so I am admitting people now. I'm admitting him now.
Okay.
What happened now? Did he go off? Okay. And people are joining already. Turn on your video. Hi.
Hello. Hi.
Yeah,
And how are you doing?
I'm
Good
fine.
and you, Jude, Jay, and Neo, and Danny.
It's afternoon here already. Hi, Bear. Good afternoon.
Pleased to
Hi
meet you,
there,
Jude.
good afternoon.
To meet
Hello.
you. Yeah. Welcome to Africa International Horror Film Festival, our masterclass. And this is the first edition. It's great to have you there.
It's an absolute privilege to be invited for such a cool initiative. Thanks, guys. Can you hear me properly?
I can hear you, absolutely.
Yeah,
Okay.
you too.
So while we're having people join us, welcome everybody. This is promising to be an extraordinary time to have conversations around horror films, to have conversations about the horror genre and how we can improve and do better as filmmakers, even as audiences, as onlookers, people who are watching the industry from the outside perspective and those who are within the industry. It's a pleasure to have everyone here, and I'm glad that we're able to make it. All right, we're having the room filled, and we're going to be starting shortly. Hi, welcome, Chip Covers. Yes, that's yeah, okay. And welcome, Chioma. Welcome, Danny. Welcome, Oniobo. Welcome, Jay. Welcome, Kings. Welcome, Taiwo. Welcome, Uche Chuku. Welcome, Presley. You're highly welcome. Thank you for joining us. It's a privilege to have you here. All right. It's a real big privilege to have you here. I'm super excited. Yes. Because obviously we don't get to talk about, thank you. We don't get to talk about horror film as much as we want to and as much as we should, because probably it's the scary part of life. And so people are trying to avoid that topic. Okay, we all want to have fun, we all want to celebrate, we all want to be happy. And then we forget that in the midst of all that happiness, in the midst of all that joy and excitement, there's the fear, all right, of the unknown. There's the scary part of joy, obviously. Of course, people in their period of excitement, they lose it. And then these are stories we want to tell, okay? These are stories we are aspiring to communicate to the world. We are aspiring to communicate across the continent. And I'm happy that we are having people here who like to be part of this conversation, okay? So we're going to be starting this instant because we already have people in the room so that we can be able to cover a lot, okay? So I'd like to say welcome to our speaker in the house. Yes, Bear, I want to say welcome. Can we hear your voice? Okay, everyone is here already, so just tell us a little hi and then we can proceed, okay?
Good afternoon, everybody. It's nice to see some faces, and the rest of you obviously have your Saturday faces on, so you've put your videos off, but hopefully your sound is still on.
Okay, well, it's okay to put up your videos so that it doesn't get more scary. Okay, we want to see people, we want to see faces. Yeah, of course, we are not hackers. So trying to hide behind the computers and then doing all sorts of crazy stuff. So we'd like to see your face, like to see your smiling, beautiful, handsome face this afternoon. And then I'll quickly take Bear's bio, and then we can proceed with the masterclass, okay? And then briefly talk about the Africa International Horror Film Festival in the long run, all right? So Bear is a filmmaker from Cape Town, South Africa. He has written and directed 2 television series, Rock in 2015 and Extra Medium in 2020. And he's acted in various South African films and television series like Wonders in 2017, Canary in 2017, Hotel in between 2016 to 2021, For Mirror, I hope I pronounced that right, in 2020, and then Finks Cliff in 2018 to 2020. His first feature film, Parable, in 2020, is a horror set in a security estate on the outskirts of Johannesburg. It was written by his brother, Chaco Adriaanse, and shot in 12 days, wow, on a limited budget. It was an official selection at the Macabro Horror Film Festival in Mexico and won Best Film at the New Orleans Horror Film Festival. The Adriaanse brothers are currently working on their second feature film, a horror adventure set in the Bloody Mountains frontier of South Africa during the 1700s. Yes, so that is Bear. So that's our speaker for today. And please, if you're in the audience, you could just give us a fire emoji. You could just celebrate. You could just celebrate. I remember I was in South Africa. That was 2008. Yeah, that was for an international youth against crime summit. It was a global summit for young leaders across the continent and even globally. And then I must say, Durban was I lodged in Durban, and it was really pretty psyched. It was an awesome experience. So I must say that South Africa must be really a great place for you.
Awesome. I'm so glad you enjoyed it. Yeah, I also enjoyed Lagos when I was there in 2001. And it's such a strange full circle for me, because I mentioned recently when I told people about this interview masterclass we're having, is that a lot of the horror films that I watched that influenced me, I bought on VCDs at the Lekki market outside of Lagos when I was in school with my brothers. So it's the first time I really went in. Hey?
Just in Lagos.
We visited there for a month, yeah, in 2001, because my father worked there for a couple of years.
Okay, all right, that's interesting. I believe over the years that experience must have featured in some of your works. I mean, definitely you write from experience, you write from the things you've encountered, and yes, I must say I did a sneak peek into your film, your feature-length film, Parable, and I must say, yeah, just the preamble of the movie, and yeah, it was awesome, very, very. Because I must say that I didn't expect what I got. I didn't expect that, but I like the whole concept. I like the whole story. And then I think it's something that we really need to venture into. So I hope with the masterclass we'll be able to answer a lot of those questions surrounding the concept, surrounding the story, the plot with which you wrote or you featured Parable. So I want to say well done, kudos for that work.
Thanks so much.
Okay. All right, so I believe we are having more people join us. That's pretty amazing. Welcome wherever you are from. This is the Africa International Horror Film Festival, the masterclass edition, and this is the first of its kind in the year 2022. And we are doing this basically to promote conversations around horror film, around horror stories. We want people to start talking about it, to be free to talk about it, to invest in it. Of course, we want more people to invest in horror films as much as they invest in comedy, as they invest in romance movies, as they invest in other genres of the arts. So, and this is what we are doing in our own little way to ensure that the topic keeps ringing in the ears of the community, the filmmaking community, even those who are film lovers, horror film lovers, and then we want people to build that conversation. Now, feel free to talk about their horrifying experiences, so that filmmakers can have more content for what they are producing, because obviously the best stories told are the ones that have happened to us. Okay, we can easily relate to them, we can easily build a structure around it, and then help other people to understand what we felt in those times. Okay, so let's start with your feature-length film, Parable. Okay, and I want you to give us an insight. I don't want to do that introduction. I want you to tell us what Parable was all about. Obviously, I know a little about it, but I'd like to hear from you. So tell us, Parable, what is it about?
So I was offered the chance after doing a series that one of the streamers in South Africa, streaming services, wanted to make a horror film, but they had limited budgets. And okay. I'm a very big horror fan, and I immediately phoned my brother and said, can't we do something? So I pitched the concept. It was a completely different concept, and it was actually based on a multi-African myth that I stumbled upon about twins, and how various cultures, well, throughout the world, but especially in Africa, have a weird fear of the concept of twins, especially in ancient times. Sometimes if twins were born, they would definitely kill one and stuff like that. So it started off like that, and I told my brother to write the movie because I was busy working on another film, and he wrote the whole movie about twins and these girls. And at the end of it, and the people said they like it, let's shoot it. And then me and my brother one night, we went for a beer and we thought about our movie, and we said we don't like the movie, we want to change it. And that night we started working from scratch on a new concept, and for us it was about the concept of intentions. And sometimes so this movie is essentially about a preacher that wants to a girl that is gay. He thinks there's a demon inside her that makes her gay, and he wants to exorcise the demon out of her. But instead of getting the so-called demon out of her, he accidentally breaks her emotionally so much, so far down, that actually some evil spirit enters her. And then he sits with the problem of that, and he goes and hides her in a security complex outside of the city of Johannesburg. So in South Africa, we have, I don't know if you guys in your countries have it, but we have very many security complexes. And that's something that I wanted to touch about, is something you mentioned, Jude, is for me, it's interesting. For me, there's a very clear distinction between horror and thriller, where thriller is usually human evil. And for me, as a viewer and as a reader, I'm not that fond of it, because I think I see it enough of it in now with Russia and Ukraine. I'm seeing it in the news, I'm seeing it on the television, on YouTube. But horror, for me, is when it becomes a supernatural element. So it's monsters or spirits or demons and stuff. And I quite like that, because that for me is more of an escapism. And what I really, and what I really appreciate about the genre horror is that it's, for me, it's the flip side of comedy, in that it elicits a visceral and actual emotion out of people. Like when people laugh in a movie, it's because they were in a way shocked by the joke, or it's an involuntary reaction. And horror is the same. it makes you jump or scare or startle. And it's not up to you. Whereas other films sometimes, like a drama, if you just sit there in silence, then the drama is kind of doing its work. But if a horror doesn't scare you, and in various parts in my movie, I found later it didn't scare people. So that's how you learn. You have to make your first one to see how it works. But I like the fact that when you watch it together with people, horrors can really shake you and elicit those emotions. But so your parable was essentially about a bad guy's good intention versus a bunch of kids who are good, but they accidentally want to help this girl escape from the security complex, which would have been fine if she was just a normal girl. But in this case, she's actually possessed by a demon. So I like the idea of those clashing forces. And I just want to give a quick shout out to Jay, my man, who's the lead in my movie. He just got in on the master class. Thanks for tuning in, brother. Yeah, but so, and for us, then we essentially had the 12 days and the limited things done, and we were running around like crazy chickens. But I guess all of you are also fans of filmmaking, and you know how it goes. In our continent has less budgets than any other continents, I believe, and we're gonna for a very long time still probably be up against that. So we have to find creative ways of overcoming our budgets. And I mean, if you just look at what you guys, the film industry in Nigeria has done, Jude, where people just go out and do it. And there's like, I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of movies come from your country. It's because I think people are just going and doing it, and not waiting for, you know, for big budgets and handouts and everything. And I think horror, although it's very challenging, is the best place to do it, because even though, as you mentioned, people don't think they want to be scared, I think there is a kind of catharsis that happens when you're scared witless, you know, like when you're really frightened. It takes you out of your body, and it elicits an emotion that you can kind of channel all your real world emotions through, and then you can return home to your safe home and kind of work through it. And so I think it is almost like a psychology session.
Okay, yeah. Well done. That's beautiful. Yeah, that's really beautiful. I'm looking at the whole concept of the movie, and then I'm saying that this kind of will challenge a lot of cultures across Africa because of the concept behind it. Obviously, when I say gay conversion therapy, it's not really a thing. It's not in that term across the continent. People just feel that, oh, this person's are probably trying to fake it or are possessed. But here in Nigeria, we don't see gay conversion therapy. So we do it, but we don't call it gay conversion therapy. Okay, there's this shaming of the personality and all that. And I had to bring this question of how you think, or your audience, for what you've created. Are you expecting that Africa gets to see this and then have to understand? Because I mean, I want to understand the message. Yeah, obviously your horror film must have a message. Okay, so you want Africans to see this and believe that these are things that are not too supernatural, that you have to go too far to that extent to try and say you want to cure someone of their of being gay, or of being of their own sexual orientation. So I want to understand what's the message you hoped to pass with that concept.
I think that
obviously you're not speaking just to the South African audience, I believe.
Yes, of course. Yeah, I think the wonderful thing was when we wrote the movie, and especially when we wrote the preacher or the pastor. I think some countries call them pastors, priests. We call them a dominee, or a lay preacher. We wrote him without necessarily a culture, because in South Africa, most of the cultures in South Africa have these kind of patriarchal, archetypal preacher men who have big followings, and they have a lot of power. So for us, it was just about power. And I think the gay conversion therapy, which is a thing that happens in certain countries, but I think there are other versions of this as well. So we chose one that we knew, but I think when young filmmakers are telling their versions of it, it should always be, it can be specific to your culture, but it should be something that you understand, which is usually a power dynamic, which is there's one person that is more powerful that thinks they are right,
Yes.
somebody that is less powerful, and there's a dynamic interplay there that happens where sometimes the powerful person wins and sometimes the other person wins. So finding your own examples is obviously half of the fun. And although this is a very dark place to start our movie, it is for us, it's nice to base the start of the movie in reality and then watch as the supernatural things unfold. So I hear you about message, and I think horror movies is a place where messaging happens almost more regularly than other genres, especially if you look at the recent bunch of horror films coming from America, like from Jordan Peele, Get Out, and Us, and Hereditary and Midsommar. They have quite overt messages about humans and the way humans, deal with each other. But as long as it doesn't become preachy, and that's always my fear, and sometimes I think I miss that mark as a writer, is I don't want to preach to somebody, because if people know what the message is, then it becomes boring. And for me, the number one rule about filmmaking is you have to keep surprising people. But people shouldn't expect the things that they're going to see. So that's kind of what I aim for, but I don't always get to it. But yeah, so in terms of Jude, and you can one day when you've watched the movie, we should maybe chat about it again, because I do believe there is a version of storytelling where you accidentally become so specific to your own culture, or even just your province in wherever you are, that you tell a story that's so specific that it doesn't translate to other places. But for us, the idea of a powerful preacher, we knew that's across the globe. There are people like that, and that'll keep going, even though they're wrong. They'll keep going in that direction because they think they're right. I mean, I think Putin, Vladimir Putin, is a version of that.
Okay, yeah, we can say that. We can say that. Obviously, it's always a tussle between the weak, the vulnerable, and then those who are more powerful. Yeah, and I like the fact that you portrayed how even the weak could what you hope to suppress, what you hope to subdue, can eventually transcend into something that can overwhelm everyone. Yeah, and I like that part of the your concept and your story. Okay, and I really look forward to looking at the whole movie during the festival later this year. Okay, of course I'm going to watch it, and then we're going to have more conversations around it. Okay, so yeah, another question about your budget. Okay, I believe that was one of the issues we addressed at the last horror film festival last year, where we talked about how we are not getting enough funding into the horror industry. So people believe that, okay, if you want to do anything horror, because people are not buying into it, people don't want to emphasize on horror. They want to emphasize on romance, love, on other things that could make them happy. And then the funds are not coming in. Okay, so I want you to let me to help us. Other filmmakers are here who want to probably get started, or who are already in the process and they're finding it hard and they're trying to get their feet on in the process of making their own films or writing. So tell me, were you able to pull through your own budget and be able to complete the film in 12 days?
Okay, cool. Firstly, I think we should all start with, if we're ever in a meeting with financiers, we should always remind them from the get-go that the #1 earning movie in terms of what it cost and what it made is a horror movie, and it's called The Blair Witch Project. And also in the top 3 is another horror movie, which is, I think, Paranormal Activity, because it cost almost nothing to make and it made hundreds of millions of dollars. So with horror, it is a bit of a gamble, because you might miss the mark completely, but it's a gamble worth taking. Comedy doesn't translate that easily across. It's very specific cultural issues usually that you approach with drama. But with horror, everybody knows what it means to be afraid. And the great thing about monsters and beasts and myths and archetypes is we don't even know where they come from. Like the concept of a zombie, although it's from Haiti, but it was, that means it comes from Africa, but we're not even sure where in Africa it came from because it's probably that old. Okay. I'm sure that the idea of, while we were making the next movie me and my brother are trying to get made, and we were looking for financing, so I'm with you guys in this boat, is we stumbled upon an African myth about the Adze, which is a vampire-like force. And obviously, that must, if you think that all humans come from Africa, then probably all our monsters come from Africa originally as well. All right. So that should firstly be a nice way to open the conversation with financiers about the universalism or the universal aspect of horror. For us, what was really, and Jay, you would remember this while we were filming, what I learned the hard way, because I'd only done comedy ahead of that, before Parable, was that in comedy, you just do another take. You go, cut, we're going to go again, and you shoot again. With horror, you have to take all the blood that you just threw over the whole set and wash it down, redress your act.
Okay.
Yes.
That could be strenuous, dude. And it requires more costs. Okay.
Time is money, obviously, on a film set. So that was a hard lesson we learned. Even something that you write on your script in one line is somebody stabs somebody else with a screwdriver. to do that takes hours and hours, and to do it again takes another few hours. So that's something we learned in the hard way. But it shouldn't, I think, hold people back, because if you look at the horror genre internationally at the moment, and a lot of the movies that I grew up with, like the 80s and 90s horror movies, they were made with very low budgets, and they still look cheap. The blood looks like tomato sauce or ketchup. The brains are clearly dog food, stuff like that. But when you write it well and people acted well, then your audience is willing to go into that unrealistic place and believe that the tomato sauce is blood and the dog food is the brains, whatever. Yeah, that's not, if you want to go in the gore direction. If you just want to tell a scary story, you can go psychological horror. There are various versions of this, but I think it shouldn't be the thing that keeps us from making horrors, especially just as preparation for this talk, Jude. I went and try to research African horror. And there is a list available, and it's a very short list. And it's from Egypt a bit, and from Nigeria, and from Algeria, South Africa. There's a few from, I think from Morocco, one or two. But, and there's obviously more that we just don't know about. But the thing is, all that tells to me is it's an untapped mine of ideas and content and things to really go mine. And we, so sorry, for in terms of our budget, what really helped was to take the budget and to be very realistic about what we can do and what we can't do. So in one phase in the movie, while we were writing it, we thought that maybe the girl called Esther in the dreamscape, she can fly to Casper's house, which is, Casper is Jay's character. She can fly over the wall. There was no way our budget was going to allow that. Then we even thought, let's just have her jump on a trampoline over the but then that becomes dangerous. So anyway, so we had to settle for some other version of and the great thing is these restrictions force you to become more creative. So I want to tell everybody that's keen on making horror films is to firstly mine your own fears and your own horror, the things that you see as horrifying. But secondly is to find solutions to the reason that you think you can't do it now. Because I think there are solutions, and with technology the way it is now, we can do it.
Okay, all right, that's great. I like that you were being realistic, and obviously, okay. Okay, yeah, best film is on Showmax. Yes, in case you want to watch it, it's titled Parable. It's titled Parable. You can go and watch it, and then otherwise you can be at the Horror Film Festival later this year because we will be showing it. Hopefully, if it goes through the judges. Okay, so yes, I'm pretty impressed by your submission so far. We need to start thinking out of the box, obviously, when it comes to horror film, hopefully until people decide to become really invested in it, that they can throw in as much funds as is required. Okay, so let's look at the telling African horror story. Okay, let's quickly look at that, and then
Can I
you want.
quickly interrupt? Can I quickly
All right,
interrupt you, Jude?
go ahead, please.
I'm so
Go
sorry. I
ahead.
just wanted to mention something on your previous point. The
Okay.
other thing that was really great, and which I'm so glad about the African International Horror Film Festival, is when it eventually became time in last year to see if we can get Parable into some 1,400 horror film festivals in the world. Like, so horror is a genre that is very well supported. So that's another thing you can tell your financiers. And the other great thing is, friends of mine recently made a South African horror film called Gaia. Now, Gaia is coming out, I think it's already out in some other countries. But if you can make a horror film relatively okay in your country with your currency, and you can sell it overseas, then financiers are going to see gains that they won't see with other kinds of investments. And because Africa is so untapped, and it's an untapped market, it's always going to be something fresh. And the other territories in the world are very hungry for fresh content because they've been telling the same stories over and over again for 100 years. Whereas, yeah, I think the African Renaissance is still happening now in terms of especially genre filmmaking and horror and maybe action as well. Sorry, Jude, you can go on to the next point. Sorry.
Awesome. I love that you raised that point because that's basically what we're going to be also answering in this other section, telling the African horror story. And I believe that there's a lot to tell about the African horror experience, both supernatural and then the physical. And I feel like we, over the years, there has been a lot of, there's been so much on the supernatural. Yes, a lot of, especially in the spots where we've been made to believe in supernatural powers, we've been made to believe in dark forces of evil, and then how they can overwhelm physical actions, physical activity, and not in such a way that it affects the community generally, but in a way that it affects us individually. Okay, so we don't have so much of the supernatural in a way that it affects a whole community. So we're always seeing it in the aspect where it has to deal with a family, it has to deal with a particular lineage, just a small session of people and how this affects them. Okay, so and we want to tell these stories better. I believe we have not even started telling the African story the way it should be, because when we look back and we are trying to, I'm very glad that we're not so much keen to start drifting into what we have from the West. I mean, in terms of trying to interpret their interpretation of zombies and the likes, but we are trying to tell our own stories the way it's happening here, and then selling it all over. So tell us, for you, what you think is the ideal process to search for African stories. You were mentioning a point where you started researching about stories in Morocco, in other parts of Africa, how people how the imaginations, when we look into the ideas and concepts that have not been tapped in the African space, we discover that we have not even touched the whole piece. So let us know, how do you think that this process, tell us the process of you telling an African story, how do you think is ideal? What do you think is ideal for filmmakers to look at when they are trying to put together a horror story from Africa and that is worthy of being sold on the international space?
That's a great question, and I think all of us probably have a part of the puzzle that will make the answer right, and this is only my version of it. Firstly, I think what I mentioned earlier about how I think even the monsters in the movies from Europe and America, I think the origin of those monsters are also Africa. And I think the fact that human origin is also in Africa makes that horror is one of those genres that it's almost very difficult to appropriate other cultures' things, because it's a very messy, interwoven history where humans have been scared of the dark and of animals and of each other and of ghosts and spirits and aliens since probably we could think. So firstly, I think be fearless in taking whatever you can find when you start researching and start and you can put your own spin on it. I recently read a very nice quote about if you want to write a story or make a film, what you have to essentially do is get your favorite references, which will be, let's say it's 5 movies that you really like and that you aspire to maybe, if you could have only made those movies. Take your 5 references and they'll be spread out like a hand, and then fill the gaps with your own personality. So in our case, what we liked to do with the script was, as I mentioned with the character of the pastor, is we didn't necessarily ascribe a culture or a race to a character until the casting process. Because for us, we felt it needs to be human stories, universally human story. And then you can see in the casting process what comes through. And if you then want to tweak it a bit, you can do that. But for us, it was important to firstly make sure that as a character, this little character works, like as a human with its own flaws and insecurities and stuff. So the lead in the movie, Casper, is just a normal guy, but he's kind of done something that he feels ashamed about. And regularly you'll see in horror films, there's some form of a sin at the start of the movie or in the backstory of the character that somebody did something wrong. And the movie is the comeuppance of that. It doesn't always have to be like that. But once again, what I'm trying to say is in terms of telling an African story, we live among these stories. You know people who have wronged other people, who have stolen, who have killed people. You can use that as origin for then weaving something from that sin, so-called sin. Once again, I'm trying to communicate that one shouldn't be too preachy or judgy when you're trying to do horror, because I think it should also be fun. And if you lean too much on your message, people are going to experience it as church and not as entertainment. And if you do it well, you can still change people's minds about something. I think Jordan Peele's Get Out did that very well. And his new one looks amazing as well. But so for us, it was about the human story and then building the supernatural on that. And in that, I think Africa is literally limitless in terms of finding those stories in your community and making sure there are opposing forces in your film, that throughout your film, it's a tug of war. Then the protagonist is winning, then the antagonist is winning. And also, this is not always the case with a monster, because usually a monster just wants to devour the protagonist. So they don't always have a very layered motivation. But if you have antagonistic characters, is to make sure that your antagonist believes in what they're doing, because that makes them a multidimensional antagonistic force and also more realistic. Because I think a lot of the current movies, not the horror movies, but the current like superhero movies from America sometimes have very one-dimensional antagonists, because they're trying to preach and show you, for instance, and it isn't wrong to address this, but if you want to show that women are equal to men, instead of making a captivating male antagonist that has reasons for doing what he's doing, they would sometimes in these movies have a very one-dimensional bad male guy that just wants to suppress women. That usually that isn't enough fuel to carry through a whole movie. You need a character that believes in what they're doing, that sometimes might even have a point for you as a viewer. You as a viewer have to go, I don't like this guy or this girl, but they have a good point.
Yeah.
And for me and my brother, I think that was the reason we threw away our previous draft. Is in the previous draft, the bad guy didn't really have a good motivation, but in the second one, it felt like the preacher had a reason to keep this girl in the security complex until he could get this demon out of her. So even though he was evil, he was right in that he wanted to contain the situation. And the kids who were right were wrong in trying to free this girl because it was dangerous and a lot of, I don't want to spoil it, but maybe some people die, who knows?
Okay, all right, that's pretty interesting. Okay, so tell me, creating and sourcing your whatever makes your art in terms of writing an African horror story, do you think it's enough? Depend on individual experience. Obviously, people want to tell their own stories, and they want to tell it as it is. You know, there's this part where creatives, people who create their own art, they get really obsessed about their work. Okay, they get really obsessed about their ideas, and they feel like, okay, I want to tell this story. It's an individual experience. I don't want it filtered. I want it the way it happened. Obviously, it cannot always come out that way, but they're just so obsessed about it. So when you're trying to bring in suggestions, or it can be better this way, we can make it, we can add a little this, a little that, and make this connect to other people, because your relation, your experience with another person is totally a different thing entirely. So what would you recommend? Would you say that we can actually just stay with our individual experiences, tell our stories as raw as they are, or we can also be liberal to allow other ideas, to allow other things in the process of what we're doing? So what do you have to say as that?
I think that the important thing to remember when you're making a film is the whole point is that it should communicate to as many as possible people. You don't want your film to only appeal to one person, which is you, because then why, you could have just sat in your chair and thought about the story then. If it's that subjective, you need to have a certain objectivity in terms of, and that's where it becomes really interesting with the writing part of it, is you need to make sure that whatever you're communicating is being communicated. Which is, and the wonderful and only way to do that is to collaborate with people and to allow people into your process. And this doesn't have to start on set with your actors and your crew. It could start with the writing process is get your people to read it, get your actors to give. I remember when we did our first table read, there were so many notes from our actors, from Jay and Carla and Jane and everybody, that it really changed the way we wrote the story. And me and my brother kept rewriting the story as we were filming, because everybody's input and the environment's input also. So I think one has to live open-handedly with your story and allow the world to come into it. And I think what I mentioned about your own story is that might be a good start-off point. But if I wanted to tell a story about how some preacher really abused me when I was a kid, I need to make that accessible. It sounds horrible to say, but I need to make it accessible that even somebody that wasn't abused by a priest or whatever could also understand it. That's the same thing with if you have a monster or something in your story, or an evil entity, is if I can understand that evil, it's almost scarier, because now I'm going, this thing isn't going to stop because this thing has a reason for doing what it's doing. And I think, and I think, as you mentioned about your own subjective thing, is, once again, I'm going to say it again because I feel so strongly about it, is if you only want to say your worldview through your movie, you're going to have a hard time to not feel like you have an agenda or you're trying to give a message to people. And once again, for messages, people can watch propaganda films or go to church or whatever. But if you want entertainment with some subtext and interesting societal things being explored, that's where film, I think, shines the most. So I would say there's almost like a litmus test that you can do with your story, which is to have a few friends and people that you trust that you tell your story to, and they will probably poke it full of holes and tell you this part of your story does not communicate, or I don't think most people see it that way. And then you might go, I think you have a good point, or you'll have to find a reason to reinforce that point of yours. So it's essentially putting your story and your concept to the fire and making sure it doesn't burn away immediately.
All right. So let's move on. And then I wanted, you just mentioned the part where your brother was very involved in the process, and then you had other people on the set. And then now let us understand this. What's the impact of a community on filmmaking process for horror movie? You think generally it is a good one? I mean, having community, having collaboration. Do you think the criticisms coming from community is good for filmmaking? Do you think, of course, because you understand that when I make a film, I have I have a picture in mind, okay, which may not readily be accessible by some other filmmaker who feels, oh, I could have done this better. Okay, so and then what would you say as regards community contributions in the horror film and telling the African story? Because obviously when you tell your version of African story over there in Africa, in South Africa, it's possible that we can have such a thing like that happening all over here in Nigeria, and then we have a different interpretation. Okay, so you are trying to interpret your own message to your audience, and then when I watch it from over here in Nigeria, and I'm like, wow, no, this should have been this way. So let's hear from you what you think the impact of criticisms, contributions, and then community collaborations have on horror filmmaking going forward.
I think a good place to start that conversation is to admit to ourselves that horror is not for everybody. It definitely isn't. My partner is also a filmmaker and a great writer, but she can't watch Parable and she doesn't watch horror movies, and I understand that completely, because it is sometimes it's shocking or it's traumatic. But for true horror lovers, there is something that happens when you watch a horror that I think doesn't have to be explained. You don't have to be ashamed in your community if you're a horror fan or a horror maker. It's your prerogative to feel that way, and you get out of it what you get out of it. It's the same as any hobby or whatever. You don't have to explain yourself to anybody, and it has its place. And we can get very philosophical about what that place is, but I think the important thing is to admit it's not for everybody, and that's totally fine. So what I wanted to say about that in terms of criticism is, firstly, one has to be strong to not allow people that are not fans of horror to criticize your film. Like, so for instance, if a critic that doesn't really watch horror films does a review of your movie and says it's horrible, take it with a bit of salt, as we say in South Africa, because it doesn't necessarily come from a place that you have to trust. Our film was slammed by a local South African reviewer who said it was absolute trash, but I could take it because I've been in other projects that he liked, but they were not horror. So I could take it both as a creator and go, okay, I did fail here and there as a storyteller, but as a horror filmmaker, actually, as a filmmaker, I think the fact that you can make a film is already a miracle. So I think nobody needs to be like given a gold star or a trophy just for trying. But I do tip my hat and respect anybody that can actually get a group of people together and make a film. I think it's really one of the craziest things that one can do with your time, your money, and your energy. So I respect anybody who does it, even if they make horrible things that I think are trash. So everybody's allowed to have their opinion. And then I just wanted to say what you said about so this is interesting. As you said, you in Nigeria, you might watch our film and you might think this should have been different, or you could say this would be different if this happened in Nigeria. To which I would say, I agree, make that film, make the different one that will be in your country, because we are all each other's influences, and I love that about filmmaking and the creative world. What interesting thing happened to our film, Jude, is I submitted it to a bunch of film festivals, and we got into two ones. One was in New Orleans, and the other one was the Macabro Film Festival in Mexico. And I'm not sure which one of those, but between the two of them, somebody, and this was in the middle of the pandemic, so this was all digital, just like we're doing today. It was through Zoom, and I had to upload my film to a DCP on their side, and the people could watch it at their homes. There wasn't an actual festival at a venue like we usually have it. So between those two film festivals, our film got stolen, and somebody re-edited the credits and took our names off, my name and my brother's name and Jay's name and everybody's names, the production company's name, everybody's names were taken off, and Mexican names were put in. And the name of the film was changed from Parable to, I think it was called something El Diablo Blanco, something like that, like the White Devil or something like that. But anyway, so this the only reason I heard about this was because a film agent at the New Orleans Film Festival saw our film, but he'd already watched it at the Macabro Film Festival, and he told the people there, this is not, somebody tried to sell him our film, and he said, this is not, I know this film, I've seen it, it's not called El Diablo Blanco or whatever. So anyway, so then we had to get involved and try to stop the whole thing. But what was interesting for me there is that let's say, because there was a bunch of Mexican names that was edited onto our film, let's say it was stolen for the Mexican market by somebody. I understand that in a certain degree, because Mexico is a very religious country, and they're quite a Catholic country. And I think they relate with the idea of a preacher going off the rails and doing things like this. So once again, about the translation of your story is, even if it's specific to your culture, it might translate if you ground it in archetypes of everyday humans, of the universal human experience. And that's why I would say, even if you start specific, make sure that the characters are dealing with normal things like jealousy or fear or resentment, and go from there, because anybody can relate to that. And then you can get really specific about where you take that monster and what specific rules there are for your beast or your evil force or whatever. But the main thing I would say is, for telling a specifically African story, is don't think that the rest of the world wouldn't be interested, because I think they are interested. Because firstly, they haven't had access to our continent in various ways, but especially in a film way. And because there's a content boom at the moment, like everybody's looking for something new. And I think a lot of the first world countries are struggling to come up with anything new, because they've been doing this so long. And we haven't. So I think this is our continent's decade to shine.
All right, so yes, I wanted to wrap up this so that we could take questions from the audience, so we can hear from what they have to say. We're going to take a few questions, but before that, I'd like you to share with me. You have just talked about putting out your work, your art to the world, and obviously when we have people creating, we know the kind of people that the society we come from, and then we're always cautious of, I want to tell a story that won't get so much of backlash, so that I won't be written off, and then that might affect my career. Then the other aspect is, if you write for your people and they don't like it, what about someone else out there who will be inspired by your story? So tell us, with what you've seen so far in the horror space in Africa, and do you think we need to do more as regards putting our work out there and making it global standard? I mean, even with limited budgets, even with the constraints of your imagination doesn't match reality, do you think it is still okay that we throw out, we put it out there, we show up in the global frontiers with what we've created, and then give it a chance to get commendations, also get critics so that we can do better. So what do you think about that briefly?
Yes, sorry, I'll try to keep it brief. I think that we should, all of us, especially as African filmmakers or African fans, and especially as horror fans, we should stop trying to make things that we think our community would want, because then nothing new is going to happen. So I come from a community, part of my heritage is Afrikaans, which is a culture in South Africa. And generally speaking, it's quite a conservative culture, quite religious, and they definitely don't like horror films. So my film wouldn't have worked if I put it in my own home language. It wouldn't have translated to anybody else, and it certainly wouldn't have worked for my people. So so I think and it was, for me, it was liberating to not think that I'm trying to make something to please my people, because then you generally stay in the bounds of your own culture and nothing new is going to come from it. So I would say be fearless, and your people don't have to watch it if they don't like it, or your community. I mean, once again, filmmaking is not supposed to necessarily, it can bring people together, but it's more an escape and an emotional thing than it is. The government is there to support people through other things. We have a different mandate as filmmakers, which is, I think, to surprise and entertain. And if you're good at it, there might be a message in there somewhere. But you have to hide it well, and people shouldn't even know it's happening to them. They should just be changed when they come out of the theater or out of the movie. So I just wanted to mention that. I think we should be brave and it's not necessarily appeal to our own cultures. What was the second part of your question?
Okay.
About putting it out there.
Yes, putting it out there, yeah.
Yeah. So for me, it was very interesting. It was a 50-50. I think 50% of the people that saw my movie didn't like it, and the other 50 quite liked it enough that it was okay. So for me, it felt like positive reinforcement, and for me, that's enough. And once again, although you don't make your movie just for yourself, if you're happy with your movie, it's not that important that everybody like it. But as I mentioned right at the start, for financiers, I think it is a good argument to make that it's a popular genre. It's an untapped market in Africa. It's an untapped field of research and myths and monsters and cultural things that we can still tap into. And I think it is an executable genre on a small-ish budget that if you do it well enough, it will sell overseas. I think also with subtitles, it's one of those genres that is very forgiving, because the actual audience is very open-minded. The horror audience is a very loyal audience that I've realized. I didn't know this. I've been a horror audience member all my life, but now since I've made one, I've realized that how loyal the audience is. They support, they rent the movie, they watch it on streaming, they go to film festivals. As you guys just did, they start their own film festivals in Nigeria for the whole continent. So remember that you are part of a broader community. You don't necessarily have to appeal to your neighbor.
Okay, that's good. Thank you very much for throwing light on all that. I must say that it's been an awesome session. We're quickly going to take a few questions from those who are watching us right now. And okay, I would like to see if we could give them audience. I hope that won't take your time. If Phil, you don't want to speak up, you could just write your question. I could see one already in the comments. And okay, we have just Presley. Who else has a question? I'll take just two out of, so that if we have more time, we can take more. Okay, Presley has a question. Okay, can we please?
Good afternoon. My name is Presley from Benin.
Okay, all
Nigeria.
right.
Okay, I want to know what is the market viability of horror film in Africa?
What's the what?
If you invest in it, the possibility of recouping your investment.
Okay.
How large
What's
is that?
what's the chances of getting your money back?
Yeah.
Thinking like
Money
an
back.
investor.
So I can only speak, Presley, thanks for the question. I can only speak based on my own experience and some of my friends' recent experiences. At the moment, we're making movies in South Africa, and horror movies only really started appearing in the past maybe 5 years, and there's not many of them. But there's investment in it in terms of it's quite small. We have quite small budgets, but because we're a filmmaking country, the crew and the technical people know what they're doing. So there's a general standard that we try to keep. And then if it meets those standards, I think there is a hungry audience for it. And once again, the horror audience in Africa will grow as the horror movies in Africa grow. You first have to, like, I first started watching horror movies as a child, and I don't know why I liked it. I don't know why I liked being scared, but we have three brothers, and we all three liked movies. It was so much fun to make a film with my brothers, but there needs to be African horror films for African kids to start liking horror films. So I think we should start there, is by leading by example, and that audience will grow. But I think the good news is I believe there is an international market for African horror, and I think that.
All right. For the questions, just in the question, in the light of the question that Presley asked, okay, the conversations around here in Nigeria recently has been about seeing your movie or your creative work as a product, okay? Thinking like a businessman, thinking like a startup, okay? So instead of just going all in to produce, and then when you're done with your work and you expect to get approval, or you expect to get people buy into it, why not do just like when you want to sell a product, when you want to create a solution for people, you get into the market and understand how much of the audience would like something that you're trying to tell, will be interested in your kind of story, will be willing to put their money on it. And then hopefully, if you can have that rough statistics, then it can give you an insight into what you're looking at as regards getting your returns. Because obviously, when you're putting money, you always want to get return on investment, okay? And I feel that's where financiers are usually scared as regards investing in horror films. So when they look at the other sides of entertainment, they look at comedy, they look at romance, they feel like, oh, not everybody relates to this, okay? So whatever you put out there, even if it's trash, you get market for it, okay? So you want to start looking at your work or your creative, what you've created as a product, okay, as a startup, as a company that can bring in returns for whoever is going to put their money on it. So I think like that could work, because that's conversations around here. So instead of just generalizing and saying, I hope my work will make sense, I hope my work will bring in money, and then you could be more realistic about it. Obviously, tech has made a lot of things easy, okay? Do we have any questions, any other questions? Please, you could see your hands just a show of hands. I have a question here already in the chat, okay? And I think I'll pick that one. And this is
yeah, you can read it, right?
Okay, you wanted to say? You could go ahead.
Is it the last one from Itai?
Okay, I thought you wanted to say something as regards what I said earlier, but let me go ahead with the question if you don't have anything yet. Okay, so he says, Itai, he says, hi, in regards to approaching our endings, is it still viable to use grim endings, or is it better to use hopeful endings given the times we live in? I believe, Bear, you understand that. So what would you say?
This is a very good question, Itai, and you speaking to my heart with that question. I don't want to give too much away, but I struggled with this with my first film, and I understand your question on a deep level, because I think that the filmmaker sometimes allows their own personal things to get into the film, and a grim ending is me and my brother fought about this because I think he didn't want necessarily a grim ending, and I felt like a grim ending is more powerful. And maybe I was just influenced by other international movies, but I agree with you that I at least want some release at the end of a film. So I think it's up to the filmmaker to decide. But I think as audience members, we expect to be taken on a journey that has an ending, and a grim ending is a lot of times not necessarily an ending. It's just a continuation of the grim, depressing arcs. And a good film has ups and downs and ups and downs. And to get a more dynamic ending, I think at least you need some form of closure. It doesn't necessarily have to be happy. It's not a comedy or a romance, but it could still have more of a closing than just a grim plunge from the cliff. So it's a great ending, but I don't think we should tell people how to end the movie. But I would say as an audience member, I would sometimes feel cheated if it's just a down ending and it just keeps going down, because the sad thing about film versus reality is like that. If we look at the world at the moment, it's sad and there's a lot of bad happening. So why would I want to also see that in my entertainment the whole time? So I understand that as audience members, we are kind of, I don't want to make things only for the audience, but I don't want to hit them over the head with this idea that all is lost and you know, life is meaningless and dull. Although you can if you want to.
Okay, all right. I like that. That's awesome. Okay, so it answers. I hope Itai, I hope your question has been answered. I hope this answers your question. It could be relative, you could do what works for you. But in the end, please don't give us the same shit we always get every day. It could always be dynamic. Okay. Yeah, okay, here's another question from Josephine. She says, I am a special effects makeup artist and Josie Effects. Okay. I've observed that high percentage of films produced in Nigeria are more of the regular ones than horror movies, which discourages someone like me who's into horror makeup. What can be done to make people start appreciating horror movies? Because she doesn't understand. What could be done? What could be done to make people interested in the stories we tell?
Firstly, I agree with you completely that there's too much of the other genres and too little of the horror genres. And secondly, as a special effects and makeup person, the one thing is, if we want to make horror movies in Africa, we usually won't have a budget for CGI. So you will have work, and you'll have a lot of work. On our movie, we used 22 liters of fake blood. And yeah, Jay, you're laughing because most of it got on Jay, not on you. But it's a great genre to be in. I think to get people excited about the genre is to see ourselves as part of the international horror community, not only as Africa, and not only because here's the sad thing: France and England and those countries, because they're very proud of their artists and their film history, the government gives a lot of money to movies. They get rebates and all kinds of things. In most African countries, there simply isn't money for them to give to us to make films. So we kind of on our own there. The necessary support from government level isn't there. So it's up to us to create that audience. But as I mentioned earlier, it's impossible to create an audience if there isn't something for them to watch. So it's like a few of us are going to have to take the bullet and make things and hope people pitch up. That's how I feel about it at the moment. The other great thing that I think is hopeful about what's happening now is just the absolute technological wave coming into Africa at the moment in terms of cell phones and streaming services. And so people have more access now to content than ever before. So what I do think is going to happen is a market that we didn't know is there is going to reveal itself to us. That is there because there's a subconscious thing in some humans that they like horror. I believe it. It's almost like you're born with it. And statistically, it has to be the same for Africa. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much for that. I believe we have to take the bull by the horn. We have to create the conversations for people to get interested. They need to, I mean, we have to put more horror movies. I believe there was a point in time here in Nigeria where our own kind of horror, it was all over the place. Okay, there were stories that were told. It came in form of folklore. It came in form of social events. The expectations that we have of people in society to have money, and then there's this story of ritual killings to be able to get money to become rich. Yeah, and those stories were in my childhood. They were the stories that prevailed. Okay, so at every point we're watching them, we're always scared. Okay, there was a lot to be afraid of. You don't want to watch those movies at night because obviously you're going to dream about them. Okay, so those times where we had the horror movie really penetrating the market, horror movies, that kind of horror was penetrating the market until recently. So I don't really get it. Is it that there is this shift from the audience interest in movies? Because back then it was a family thing to watch movies. Okay,
Yes.
Until then, the advancements in technology, you can now have your phone and you don't need to sit together in the sitting room and then watch movies. You could just be in your room in a corner and you're watching what you like. Okay, so I think that also affected the connection with which people want to see horror movies. So who in their loneliness and in their the separateness, people are looking for something to keep them happy, something to make them laugh. Okay, so I think affected that. So I think we can also leverage that part of the internet and start pushing out our films. Although it will take a lot of time for us to sponsor our movies to go on to stream on these platforms. I know it can take time, but if we can be able to create and penetrate these places where these people are trying to get their entertainment from, we can be able to revive the topic of horror in Africa. Okay, I have Kings. Kings, you have a question? Okay, I think there's other question in the chat, but let's hear from Kings.
Yes.
Can we give Kings the floor? Let me see. There's still questions here.
Should I quickly start with one of the questions in the chat from Danny?
Okay, all right. Let's do the questions in the chat. There is one. It says, is there a link? Is there a link between audience reactions to horror stories in Africa and the colonization's heritage? Is there a link between audience reactions to horror stories in Africa and the colonization's heritage, both English, French, and Portuguese? So, Great Bear.
That's a very, very good question, and I'm not sure if I have the answer to it. But I think my belief, from what I understand about horror, is it's more general than culturally specific if it's done well, because it taps into universal human fears and things. I do think the actual history of colonization might be some horror stories, because I think the horrors that were done upon this continent is widely visible for everybody. It's a great place to maybe find stories, and sadly enough, horrifying stories. Once again, to get that from historical thriller to horror, where it might be more something supernatural, is where it's going to become very interesting. In terms of English and French and Portuguese, I have no idea. My partner is a half Portuguese, so I'll ask her when I see her again if what their history of horror is. But I don't know necessarily English and French. I mean, they have Frankenstein was probably a British, was it, or was it Mary Shelley I think she was a British lady, and so I don't know their history of it, but I doubt, as I said earlier, I doubt whether we see it now as horror is being imported into Africa from the West or from the First Nations, but I think it's the other way around. I think horrors were exported out. They went with humans, they went with slaves, and they came back, and it's doing this around the globe. So the stories are essentially traveling all over the world, and we need to find those links that you're mentioning there. But in terms of audience reactions, I think not. I think a good scare will scare anybody from any culture. I'm sorry, King, I see you can't unmute your mic. You're welcome to type your question if you want to in the chat. I'll quickly maybe answer O'Neill's. Is it O'Neill?
O'Neill, yes. He says, I
O'Neill.
have issues. Okay, I have issues with the Nigerian Film and Video Censors Board on censoring films like horror in the horror genre. And then especially when the end doesn't give a glaring resolution. As we know, most horror don't end as usual. Sometimes suspense for the viewers to decide, again, the market where to sell. Unlike in those days, you barely see a horror film in the cinemas. This is discouraging because you can't spend fun shooting a film and not get a return. Okay, so I feel what he's trying to say here is that, okay, I think it's being specific to the Nigerian markets where the regulators in the industry they don't censor, they don't approve of horror films, probably especially perspective of horror, and then they feel, okay, it has to be in this way, and then give you support that is needed. So I don't know how it is in South Africa, but I mean, basically.
It's a very good point, O'Neill, and I think we're not quite similar. I think our censors board is so do anything anymore. But the sad thing is, my film industry had to pivot away from the cinema market because the cinema, they reserve this usually, and then more broad, popular appeal films. Services and the international search for content is kind of taking that place. So this is what happened to Parable now, is unfortunately, I don't own any of the intellectual property on Parable because I was commissioned to do it by a streaming service. But they've been, I think, as I understand it, they've managed to sell it in another territory. So they are making money as the financiers. And exactly the same happened to friends of mine recently made a film with their own money. It's called Gaia. It's a local South African film. And they now sold it in 3 territories. And everybody who made the film for free has shares in the film. And they are now making money from it. So that's a model that I think is going to happen more and more. And I think just to speak to the idea of the censors, I think censors and governments will always be very far behind the creatives in any industry. And they come to the party not as supporters and funding, as I mentioned in some of the other countries, but more as like a handbrake that holds the whole thing back and doesn't give any support. So we need to get to a place where we don't really even care about them. I don't know. But if you think about a movie like one of the first zombie films in the 60s was Night of the Living Dead. And everybody said in the lead role, the community, and the film was overtly about racism. And yet it became one of the grossing films of its era. And there is we can't wait for our government to give us money anymore because it's not going to happen. We know it. There's a lot of corruption in our government. Anyway, the minister. So that's not happening. So filmmakers all over are just finding to put their it like that. But I think if you people in your country use as their main platform, whether it is a stream situated in Lagos, the headquarters of Netflix Africa, as I understand it, is in Lagos. Your next one is through Netflix. We've never been closer to funding, I think, than these days.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. All right. So I believe so. Next, this question, and it says earlier you talked about how your where someone else took credit, and then its name and casts edited out. How did you handle this? And also, what measures do you think can be taken to prevent it? I mean, this, I believe, is talking about intellectual property rights. And they also asked, were there any issues with the due to do? And when they heard about what happened to Parable, says it's curious to know how you handle these things, whether there was a due process for such occurrence or not. So how did you go?
So at first I was amazed. So I think I was shocked, and then I was a bit flattered that anybody would want to steal my film and try to resell it. And luckily, tough situation, because I entered the film through that goes to all the festivals in the world, most of the festivals in the world. So you upload your film to that, and then the film festivals can watch it, and it's a secure link, and they can't rip it off and everything. But then something went wrong with my actual film as a file, and that maybe was my mistake. And I had to come clean to the streaming service and tell them that this happened now, and I'm sorry, I thought it was safe and everything. But luckily, I think they out there and to get some awards, recognition, or whatever. So I think they and they didn't punish me at all, but they luckily had due process. So I think there was a lawyer involved that had to try to track them down and stop the sale, because what they were doing is I didn't know this existed, but there's the film market as we know it internationally. There's a B market, a C market, and a D market, which is for lesser famous movies with no stars in territory or two, because people usually buy it in packages. So they would buy one big blockbuster movie and then 10 smaller titles. So I think they tried to put my film in one of those bundles. So they could have made money out of it, but I think the lawyers, I'm gonna follow up on that. I'm gonna hear from the people what was the end of that, because I don't know what was the end of that. But there was a lawyer that had to get involved and try to stop the producers, it was all under fake names. So it was Angel Suarez, which is a great name for a protagonist in like a. Anyway, that was the new director's name.
Yeah. The process required a lot of funding for a newbie, for a greenhorn filmmaker. Do that because of the funds that is required and all that. But I believe that's why Kings is asking, because not everybody might have that follow. So I think there was a part of the question where it says this wasn't really handled by you, it was taken up by the streaming service.
The only way to prevent it apparently is to make a screening copy which has a watermark. But as I understand it, is the illegal market, which is even marked copy of a movie. I mean, everybody does piracy, so which is, I think that becomes a whole other issue, which is usually, I think you can put a watermark on your film. Knows this given only to this festival and they can see it from there. But the mistake I made was to send it directly to somebody. And as I did now, Jude, with you guys, with the African Horror International Film Festival, I sent, I think Film Freeway is maybe a safer bet than to transfer it any other way.
Okay. All right, that's good. So the onus is on filmmakers to do their research on the places where they also try to protect their work, like you suggested, to watermark it and then have a watermarked screen copy. That's a good one. Okay. I think we'll be calling this session. We're going to. I believe it was well addressed. All right, so this is already, I have just 5 more minutes and I'm being here at the masterclass. It was really an exciting experience having you share everything about with your in your own space and then looking at it globally. I want to say thank you so much. We're excited to have every one of us have stayed, from Chris, Onyobo, Tai, Jay, okay, Kings, Linda, Newell, Patience, Drew. Thank you guys for staying. It was really a pleasure having you all. Okay, this question has been answered. Okay, this has been answered, Itai. It has been answered. So you could get the recording of the session. Yes, we recorded the session. So we've answered, cautious with time because we just have an hour, 30 minutes here and we have a few minutes left. So thank you so much. Any last words? Any last words? Any last words? For filmmakers.
I want to thank all of you for. I thought it was going to be only me and Jude because it's a Saturday afternoon and it feels like there's a World War III going on. So thank you all for tuning in and watching this and being fans of the filmmaking and especially Jay. Guys, I'm going to put my email here at the bottom. If you have any more questions, I'll help where I can. I'm also learning all these things as I go. But I just wanted to share my excitement. I think this is going to be an exciting decade, and I think Africa or our continent is really going to step up to the world stage when we tell our own stories in our own way. And I think we should be brave in doing that, and we should help each other out and know that it's not a competition, but the rise for all of us, for the whole continent. So where we can, we should help each other out and boost each other's films and each other's everything. So even if we have criticism, wouldn't be afraid of giving some criticism as well. So thank you all, I appreciate it, and good luck with all your projects.
Yeah, would you mind giving us, okay, you said you're dropping your email. You could also give us your handles on social media so that you could get your following from those who are here. Yes, give us your handles. Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, is Jude Onyedeke. And then please follow us on our platform at Festival. So you check it out, you see it's AI on Instagram. Follow us, and then area later this year when we'll be having the physical event. I look forward to that.
Love to come. Thanks, guys.
Okay, all right. So while we're waiting that, we're expecting that and hoping that your movie qualifies too and gets an award, hopefully too.
Even if it doesn't,
I want to thank you to everyone that joined in. Please look forward to the next masterclass. We're going to be doing this, and we would love to have you again. Yes.
That's a wrap. Cheers, guys.
Bye.